Had an opportunity to speak at the convention over the weekend with speaking of speaking. Yes, let's be redundant. The Speaker of the House of our state representatives, Scott Bedke, and he may be joining us in a few days to talk about an environmental issue. I might flesh that out a little bit later in the program. Actually, I had a great chance. I got to meet Raul Labrador for the very first time and got to chat with a lot of people who we hear about, but I don't necessarily ever get to put a face with. 24 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. I want to tell you briefly about my friend Dr. Eric F. Jones. He was in the studio with us a few weeks ago. We may be seeing him again a little bit later this summer. He uses a holistic, systemic approach to wellness, and he's been doing this for nearly a quarter century. With master's and doctorate degrees in marriage and family therapy, Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing, such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self-regulation, and naturopathy to help remedy and change mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. That helps you manage your life a little bit better. He's currently accepting new patients and has evening and Saturday appointments. You can call him at 208 731 7178. That's 208 731 7178. And he has his Facebook page up. Eric F. Jones, PhD, mental health and wellness therapist, and he spells Eric with a C at the end of it. Speaking of environmental issues, I came across this today. I got three things here. Don't know that we'll get through all of them because, again, Randy Staples is coming up in about 15 minutes, and I'll talk a little bit of state politics with him while we're on the line. But in the meantime, this is a story from Pravda on the Potomac, the Washington Post, Alaska's huge climate mystery and its global consequences. We have been hearing over the last several years, of course, that this global warming tripe or trope or whatever you call it, that it is settled science. And you can't argue with the liberals on anything they claim is settled at this point. But then every once in a while you realize in their effort to starve a few billion people on the planet to bring about their earthly paradise, they may be wrong. And the writer says in recent years, climate scientists have grown increasingly concerned about a carbon problem in the far north. And the amounts of carbon involved are enormous. One common estimate is that there is more than twice as much carbon stored in northern permafrost as there is currently wafting about the planet's atmosphere. Ooh, how dare they up in Alaska? A major and surprising new report, though, from the U.S. Geological Survey would appear to undercut significantly this worry, at least for one key northern region, the U.S. state of Alaska. Now, while it makes up just 18% of the United States' total area, the state stores 53% of all the nation's carbon, much of it in permafrost below the ground, according to the study. Indeed, it adds that wildfires in Alaska give off more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere annually than all fires in the lower 48 states. I knew we could blame those Alaskans. Maybe we better give them back to Russia. The study finds that Alaska is a net carbon repository, or what's called a carbon sink. Now, what does this mean? The state is subtracting a relatively small amount of carbon from the atmosphere at the moment, about 3.7 million metric tons per year. In other words, the permafrost is sucking the stuff up. It's not going up into the atmosphere, it's being sucked up by the ground. Heading out to the year 2100, the state as a whole should wind up pulling even more carbon back out of the atmosphere than it is now, rather than expelling it. In other words, the sink should strengthen. 736-0300, our telephone number. It's 827 and it's 77. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. You know, it's interesting. 98% of all the CO2 is in the oceans. And with all the ring of fire activity, article in the paper recently said, the CO2 level is really rising. It's, temperature rises in the oceans. It releases more of this CO2. Also, we've had a lot of volcanic activity, if you've been watching the news, all around the planet. And that also puts a lot of extra CO2. But the bottom line is, folks, our plants are starved for CO2. We can produce a lot more crops and are with the increased amount of CO2 in the atmosphere now. All 73 of the UN models have been wrong. It's a total hoax, and we better wake up to that fact.
This story actually goes into some detail that Alaska will be growing a lot more crops and feeding a lot more people around the world because of these changes. So, therefore, the warming of the planet may actually turn out to be a plus versus all of the complaints and the screaming from the henny penny crowd.
Well, it's true. The planet does much better during the medieval warm period, we were about 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than we are now. That's where Greenland got its name. They were growing crops in northern Europe that they can't grow today. And unfortunately, overall, we're in a cooling period, which is not really good for growing crops. And we're overall, certainly, we have warm in between that. But we go through cycles, sun cycles, and so forth. But it's temperature determines how much CO2. It's not the other way around. CO2 doesn't drive temperature. This has been proven over and over. It's a scientific fact, and they just turn it 180 degrees around. They're going to take away our coal-fired plants. We're not polluting the planet like our China and India are taking our coal, and we're getting the pollution coming back across the ocean. This is total ridiculous, ludicrous, really.
Hey, thank you much for chiming in. Absolutely agree with that. It is ridiculous. In fact, I've got a little bit more on this coming up in the next segment of the program, and then we'll be joined by Randy Staples. But here you go again. Media was criticizing Republicans in Idaho for being kooks for even considering that, for saying that carbon dioxide is not an air pollutant. It isn't. And as I said, even a lot of Democrats understand that. It's only if you work over a wacky newspaper that you don't know the difference. We're talking a little bit about the wacko left in its efforts to try and wipe out what fuels our planet, because, of course, they keep screaming that if we don't, it's going to be the end of the planet, even though evidence keeps turning up to show that it is not settled science. 8:34, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com, 77. Thank you for listening to the program today, but if you're struggling with hearing us, I need to recommend a visit with Dr. Christine Pickup. She is a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, and she's the only locally owned independent hearing healthcare practice in southern Idaho at the moment. With advances in healthcare, people are living longer, healthier lives. However, cognitive decline continues to be a major concern. People with hearing loss have a much greater risk of developing cognitive decline, which can lead to dementia. The greater the loss, the greater the risk. Keeping your hearing health is an important part of overall wellness. Knowing your hearing status and doing something about it can lead to a better, healthier life as you age. Now is the time to schedule a hearing evaluation. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment today. The number 208-312-0957. Stephen Moore, who's written some books about just how mad this whole war on climate and or war on energy is, has a piece at the Washington Times today. Like a crazed serial killer, the liberal green groups are celebrating their victory of putting America's major coal producers out of business, to say nothing of the tens of thousands of miners placed in unemployment lines. Several thousand more mining jobs were lost last month. Now, to get to their next homicidal high, the leftists have turned their ambitions on the oil and natural gas industries. Clean-burning natural gas. Well, absolutely, they're going after that. Here is how the Sierra Club spokeswoman, Lena Moffett, explains the Grand Green Vision. Quote, "We have moved to a very clear and firm and vehement position of opposing gas." I work in an enclosed area. I'm sorry, I'm breaking the quote here, but I work in an enclosed area, and we're all concerned about gas. All right, let's resume the quote. "We oppose any new gas-fired power plants. We also have a policy opposing fracking," unquote. Yeah, well, I don't. And I'm going to be working hard to ensure that my guys get into office this fall so we can continue to have cheap energy, so we continue to find the reason Americans can't save any longer, don't have any money to put the kids through college, don't have the money to retire, is because we're paying through the nose for all of these new technologies that supposedly are going to be better. Look, over the last 3 months, I have had a combined electric and natural gas bill each month of under $30. I'm very pleased with that. If these people have their way, I'll be paying $130 per month. I can't afford that. 8:36, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And then this, John Felmy, who is a man who used to work inside the energy industry, is now working as a consultant mainly, has this in the Washington Examiner, the case against biofuel mandates. A Harris poll, and this means a poll of American people, conducted in March, shows registered voters are concerned about rising levels of ethanol in gasoline. Not rising temperatures. No, we're concerned about rising levels of ethanol. 77% say they worry about the risk of forcing more than 10% ethanol into their vehicles. That is 4 out of 5 Americans who were surveyed. Vehicles operating on fuel blends containing more than 10% ethanol have been damaged in tests. Plus, adding ethanol reduces mileage because of the corn alcohol contains about two-thirds as much energy as straight gasoline. As a result, motorists have to fill up more often. In addition, he says, I am constantly making sure that all gasoline with ethanol has been emptied out of my small power tools because he has experienced major repair costs if he did not. And he said, of course, you can buy straight gasoline from major hardware chains. He said, I did for $24 per gallon. um, I was buying a lot of gas over the weekend, driving back and forth between here and Nampa. And I'm telling you right now, this whole ethanol, first of all, in order to produce all of this ethanol in mainly Iowa, but in a lot of other states too that grow a lot of corn, we're doing more harm to the environment than we are saving it. And yet, you cannot, this is such leftist dogma. You cannot break it. They refuse to let it go. Now, I mentioned earlier, Scott Bedke may be joining us on the show sometime in the next couple of weeks to talk about some reaction he's had from some of his constituents around the state of Idaho. He is the Speaker of the State House of Representatives. He was telling me on Friday he's been getting a lot of calls about this new federal mandate that it's okay to kill bald eagles while you spin those giant wind turbines out there on the grasslands and in the sagebrush. And he said, yet why do we have to then protect sage grouse? You know, it's not just the bald eagles. Other birds are dying, as well as it's terrible for bats. These turbines suck the air out of the bats' lungs, and they collapse their lungs, and they just drop dead. This is our insect control. This is our rodent control, and yet these loopy SOBs seem to believe that it's okay to kill all of the birds and the bats, unless of course it's one of those awful sage grouse. Oh my goodness, we got to protect those. Those are okay to keep, but the others have to die, in other words, so we can continue to promote an expensive alternative form of energy, which also mars the landscape. You know, that's one thing I noticed driving back and forth on the interstate over the weekend. You look out and you see all these things dancing around out on the horizon. Yeah, that's a beautiful sight. 20 minutes now away from 9 o'clock. Randy Staples will be joining us in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Randy is the publisher of, I should say he's the writer of Idaho Weekly Briefing. That's maybe a better way to put that. And he joins us on Monday mornings on the program in this next upcoming time slot. We'll talk a little Idaho politics in just a matter of minutes.